The invitation materialized not as a casual suggestion, but as an ultimatum wrapped in silk. It arrived in a sleek, embossed envelope, its heavy cardstock bearing the distinct, almost predatory mark of the Piers Morgan uncensored logo, emblazoned in a stark, uncompromising black. Inside, a single perfectly weighted card held words that promised not merely an interview, but a reckoning. Caroline Levit's communications team, veterans of countless media skirmishes, opened it with wary eyes, a collective intake of breath echoing the unspoken question, "What fresh hell is this?" They knew Piers Morgan. Everyone in Washington did. His invitations were never mere gestures of cordiality. They were challenges, gauntlets thrown with an undeniable swagger. He thrived on confrontation, on exposing perceived weaknesses, on the theatrical dismantling of political figures under the unforgiving glare of studio lights. And with the midterm storm building on the horizon, a tempest of political divisiveness and simmering public anger, this particular invitation felt less like an offer of a platform and more like a carefully baited trap. The air around them seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, an electric hum of anticipation that preceded a major event. Caroline, seated behind her expansive desk in her White House office, a bastion of calm amidst the swirling chaos, read the invite silently. Her expression didn't flicker, a testament to years spent mastering the art of the poker face in the most unforgiving arenas. Her communications director, a man whose career was built on anticipating every rhetorical curveball, raised an eyebrow, a silent query hanging in the air. "He thinks I'll fold," she said finally, her voice even, almost detached, yet underscored by a steel that belied its quiet delivery. It wasn't a question, but an observation, a statement of fact already processed and dismissed. "He wants a show," her director murmured, a hint of concern lacing his tone. "You think it's a trap?" A faint smile, barely perceptible, touched Caroline's lips. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of a quiet, deep-seated conviction. "I think it's an opportunity," she corrected him. The word hung in the air, transforming the perceived threat into a strategic advantage, a weapon she intended to wield. Piers had, after all, taken subtle, yet undeniably stinging jabs at her in previous segments. He'd dismissed her as Trump's obedient megaphone, a mere talking point machine, and perhaps most gallingly, one of the least battle-tested press secretaries in recent history. Now he wanted her on his turf, under his rules, in his studio, facing his trademark mix of biting sarcasm, smug condescension, and relentless interruption. Her team hesitated, a palpable reluctance in their posture. "You know how he plays," one advisor cautioned, his voice low. "He'll bait you, cut you off, twist your words." Caroline's response was calm, her resolve unwavering. "Then I won't let him," she stated, tapping her desk with a precise, almost imperceptible rhythm. It was a promise, a vow to herself and to her team. "I'll come with more than talking points. I'll come with receipts." The show was scheduled for Thursday night, prime time, the perfect stage for a public spectacle. As the announcement hit social media, it exploded. The internet buzzed with the impending clash. Caroline Levit versus Piers Morgan, Liv. Headlines across the political spectrum followed. Can she hold her own? Piers versus press secretary. Sparks expected. While The View openly mocked the matchup and MSNBC rolled their eyes in dismissive disdain, conservative circles rallied, their collective voice a defiant roar. Caroline's going into the lion's den. The stage was set, the gladiators chosen, and the nation prepared to watch a battle for control of the narrative, a clash that promised to be nothing short of seismic. The day of the taping arrived cloaked in a typical London drizzle, the city, lights casting a shimmering, almost theatrical glow over the slick, rainy pavement. Caroline, a figure of poised determination, stepped out of the motorcade, her tailored navy suit a sharp silhouette against the muted urban backdrop. Her shoulders, cut with military precision, accentuated her resolute posture, and the minimal jewelry, save for a small, elegant silver cross necklace resting at her collarbone, a silent reminder of her mother's unwavering resolve, spoke volumes of her understated power. Her heels hit the concrete with a steady, unyielding rhythm, each click an echo of her unwavering resolve. This was not a hesitant arrival, it was an entrance. Inside the sprawling, clinically lit studio, Piers Morgan was already in his element, a predator surveying his domain. Mic'd up, notes spread across his glass desk, he leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied grin playing on his lips as if he possessed some secret knowledge, a trump card yet to be revealed. "She's not ready," he confided to his producer, his voice a low, confident rumble. "She'll fold the second I press her." He had no idea. The words, thick with smug certainty, hung in the air, a foreshadowing of his impending miscalculation. Then, with a sudden, almost blinding intensity, the studio lights flared white, casting long, stark shadows across the pristine glass desk that separated them. The opening sequence rolled, a dizzying montage of rapid cuts, world headlines flashing, images of protests and political scandals, and, interspersed within, Caroline Levit herself, stepping confidently off Air Force One, sparring with tenacious reporters, walking through the White House press room with an undeniable aura of authority. The music swelled, a crescendo of anticipation, then cut abruptly, plunging the studio into a charged silence. "Tonight," Piers Morgan announced, his voice dripping with dramatic flair, "we welcome someone who's become a central figure in America's political theater." He paused for effect, his eyes locking onto Caroline. Caroline Levit, press secretary, Trump loyalist, and some might say the most combative communicator in Washington today. Caroline didn't flinch. Her posture was straight, an unbroken line of resolve. Her eyes fixed, unblinking, on Piers. Her hands rested calmly on the glass desk, a picture of unflappable control. She wore no earpiece, a deliberate choice. No coaching, no delay, no external influence to interrupt her immediate, unfiltered response. Piers leaned forward slightly, a glint of challenge in his eye. "Caroline, let's not waste time. You've made headlines defending President Trump's deportation policies, the southern border crackdown, and calling critics of his administration, what was the phrase, soft-handed elitists. I want to ask plainly, do you even understand the damage your words cause, or do you just memorize scripts?" The moment was perfectly orchestrated. A cold, calculated question, a dismissive smirk, a jab laced with condescension. The crowd behind the cameras tensed, a ripple of silent expectation. Producers, their eyes glued to monitors, waited for the stumble, the first sign of cracking. Caroline blinked once, a slow, deliberate movement, then smiled. It was not a smile of amusement, but of recognition, of a trap identified and disarmed. "Here's what I understand," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the tension, "is that truth cuts deeper than performance, and you of all people should know that." There was a pause, short but electric. Piers leaned back slightly, a flicker of amusement crossing his face, though it was quickly veiled. "I see," he said. "So you've come prepared with slogans." Caroline nodded slowly, her gaze steady. "No slogans, just facts, and if you're ready for those, we can begin." Piers chuckled, a sound devoid of genuine humor, then turned to the studio. Audience, a showman acknowledging his crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we might be in for a storm tonight." He pivoted back, his tone still sharp. "One more question before we dive in. When you're this young, this polished, and this fiercely loyal, don't you ever wonder if you're being used?" Caroline didn't hesitate. I'd wonder more if I were sitting here playing neutral while my country burns. The air in the studio shifted. The opening jab had landed, but not the way Piers expected. The chessboard was already tilting, and Caroline, with a calculated, unwavering move, had just declared her formidable presence. Piers tapped his pen against the glass desk, the faint click echoing in the charged silence of the studio like a ticking clock, marking the seconds before the inevitable escalation. His smile was wide, a showman's flourish, but there was a new, sharp edge to it, a hint of unease beneath the practiced charm. "Let's get into it then," he said, his voice a smooth, confident glide. "President Trump's immigration policy, your cornerstone defense. You've stood by it, praised it, and called it protecting Americans. Others call it cruel, even inhumane. Families torn apart, children in cages. Do those words mean anything to you, or is that just liberal noise to you people?" Caroline didn't flinch. Her composure remained absolute, a rock against the rising tide of his accusations. "Let's be clear," she began, her voice steady, devoid of emotion. "What's cruel is ignoring the criminal network smuggling people across the border. What's inhumane is pretending open borders are compassionate while Americans die from fentanyl and violent crime. You want to talk about compassion, Piers? Start with the victims." He arched a brow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "So you're saying it's about safety, not politics?" Caroline nodded, her gaze unwavering. "It's about sovereignty. You may not value that here in London, but in America we protect our borders, because a country without borders isn't a country." A murmur rippled through the audience, a mix of approving nods and skeptical whispers. Piers leaned forward, sharpening his tone, attempting to regain the offensive. "Let me quote you, Caroline. If you want open borders, you don't belong in Washington. That's a pretty exclusionary statement, isn't it? What about the millions of Americans who disagree with you?" She replied coolly, a subtle challenge in her eyes. "They have the right to be wrong, and I have the responsibility to protect the people they pretend to care about." A flicker, swift and subtle, passed across Piers's face, part surprise, part intrigue. She wasn't rattling. In fact, she was pressing. He shifted topics, seeking new ground to destabilize her. "Let's talk about climate change. Another thing you've called a political shield. You don't believe it's real." Caroline shook her head, dismissing the premise with a slight tilt of her chin. "I believe it's real. I also believe politicians use it to expand government, push taxes, and control people's lives. You don't need to burn the economy down to save the planet." Piers was quick, sensing a potential opening. "That's a line, Caroline. It sounds good, but you're dodging the science." "No," she said, her voice firmer, cutting him off before he could fully land the blow. "I'm rejecting the weaponization of it. There's a difference." The tension in the room was rising, palpable now. The chess game was no longer one-sided. Piers, for the first time, was meeting a wall of control, precision, and an unexpected fire. He adjusted his papers, a nervous habit, then smiled slightly, a concession. "I'll give you credit, Caroline. You don't fold easily." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a low, resonant tone that drew the audience closer. "You're right, I don't." The definitive moment Piers realized he wasn't in control anymore wasn't a word, but an action. Calmly, deliberately, Caroline reached into her tailored blazer and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The audience, the producers, even Piers himself, seemed to pause, suspended in anticipation, as she smoothed it flat on the glass table. "This," she said clearly, holding it up for the cameras, for Piers, for the world to see, "is a DHS report detailing the 1,978 illegal immigrants with felony convictions deported under the Trump administration in just 1 year, including charges of homicide, assault, and trafficking." She slid the page toward him, a physical manifestation of her argument. "You asked earlier if I understand the impact of our policies. I do. This is the impact. And if you're going to call me cruel for standing behind it, then you better be ready to face these numbers." Piers hesitated, visibly thrown. He hadn't expected this level of preparation, not from her, not live. As if on cue, the screen behind them shifted, displaying the key figures from the report in stark, undeniable graphics. No spin, just raw stats. The audience gasped as headlines flashed. "Repeat offenders deported. Operation Sentinel success." Cartel interdictions doubled. Caroline continued, her voice now steely, infused with unshakable conviction. "You want to mock me for being young? You want to reduce me to a mouthpiece? But I come armed with the one thing no smear can erase: facts." The air grew electric. Piers tried desperately to regain his footing. "Caroline, facts without context are just tools. Numbers don't show the families broken, the children separated." "Neither do your sound bites," she interrupted, her voice snapping with a newfound intensity. "You want to talk context? Then let's talk about the families who were victims of those you would have let stay. You say I'm cold for defending border security. I say you're reckless for ignoring its consequences." The studio was silent now. No one shifted. Even the camera crew seemed to freeze, mesmerized. Then slowly, applause broke out from the audience, tentative at first, then growing in strength. Piers sat back, blinking, his composure finally fracturing. This wasn't the interview he'd planned. She wasn't cracking, she wasn't folding, she had just flipped the table. And he wasn't sure how to take it. Piers Morgan wasn't a stranger to being challenged. He had faced titans, prime ministers, generals, Silicon Valley billionaires, all under the searing heat of studio lights. But this was different. Caroline Levit wasn't reacting the way most guests did. She wasn't defensive, nor was she spinning, deflecting, or pleading. She was leading relentlessly, unflinchingly, and that, above all else, infuriated him. He adjusted his jacket, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of agitation, then leaned forward again, forcing a smirk, a desperate attempt to reassert dominance. "Caroline," he said, cutting through the residual buzz of the studio, "let's not pretend you're some lone crusader. You represent a deeply controversial administration. Trump's presidency divided America like no other. Riots, racial tension, and chaos in the streets. How do you defend that and still call yourself a voice for unity?" Caroline gave a short breath, not quite a laugh, but close, a sound of genuine, yet controlled derision. "You think unity comes from agreeing with you?" she asked, her voice infused with a quiet power. "That's not unity. That's submission." The audience shifted, a collective gasp echoing through the room, sensing something bracing, something defiant, coming. "True unity," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "comes from telling the truth, even when it's unpopular. I won't lie to Americans to make elites feel comfortable. That's not my job. That was the last administration's specialty." Piers raised an eyebrow, but Caroline wasn't finished. "You talk about division, but division didn't start with Trump. It started when working-class Americans were ignored, laughed at, silenced, called deplorables. Trump didn't divide them. He gave them a microphone." The room was hot with energy now. Applause broke out again, louder this time, a surge of approval. Piers's jaw tightened, his control visibly slipping. "So you're saying," he shot back, his voice strained, "that Trump healed America?" "I'm saying," Caroline replied, picking up the DHS paper again and holding it aloft, "that he forced America to confront what it had ignored for too long." She looked directly at Piers, her eyes piercing. "He didn't cause the fire. He pulled the alarm." Piers sat back, gripping his pen a little harder, the showman's charm cracking. It was supposed to be a pressure interview, a takedown, a moment to show her limits. Instead, Caroline was rising with every challenge, unshaken, unflinching, turning every jab into fuel. The rhythm of the interview had shifted, and Piers knew it. The crowd knew it. And worst of all, so did Caroline. He straightened in his chair, a hint of agitation tightening his posture. For the first time in the segment, he glanced off camera as if to signal producers, or maybe just to collect himself, but Caroline didn't give him the space. "You look surprised," she said, her tone controlled, edged with triumph. "Did you expect me to flinch, to fold like one of your hand-picked guests?" Piers shot back quickly, desperate to regain some ground. "I expected you to come prepared, but I didn't expect you to turn this into a campaign speech." She smiled, a confident, knowing smile. "That's where you're wrong. I didn't come to campaign. I came to correct the record." She gestured at him and the room around them, "and clearly that's long overdue." The studio was thick with silence now. The audience wasn't clapping, but only because they were utterly riveted. A storm was brewing under the surface, the kind that made people lean in and stop scrolling on their phones. Piers leaned forward, eyes narrowing, pushing for the kill shot. "Let's talk about January 6th then. The riot, the insurrection, your defense of Trump's rhetoric. How can you justify standing behind someone who inspired that chaos?" Caroline didn't blink. "I'll never justify violence, but I will ask a fair question. Why don't you bring this same energy when cities burned during BLM riots, when federal courthouses were torched, police stations seized?" Piers began to interject, but she pushed forward, an unstoppable force. "Here's the truth, Piers. Political violence is wrong, period. But selective outrage is worse. It divides people, devalues justice, and makes a mockery of unity." There it was again. That balance, not dodging, not appeasing, just reframing the debate on her terms. "You think you're above hypocrisy?" Piers pressed, his voice strained. "You've never wavered, never misjudged?" Caroline leaned forward, resolute. "Of course I've made mistakes, but defending the truth isn't one of them." The lights above flickered. Slightly, cameras still rolling, capturing every nuance. Piers looked at her, not as a flustered guest, not as a punchline, but as something else entirely, a real opponent, the kind that didn't back down, and the kind that just might be winning. "Let's be honest, Caroline," Piers said, cutting through. The buzzing tension, attempting a final devastating blow. "All this passion is fine for sound bites, but you haven't answered what matters. You're young, you're idealistic, but people wonder if you're just a mouthpiece. Are you truly capable of thinking for yourself? Or are you just echoing Trump with a prettier face?" The jab was cold, calculated, designed to sting. Murmurs rippled through the audience, a few gasps. Even the producers behind the glass looked up from their monitors. Caroline didn't blink. Slowly, deliberately, she turned toward Piers, her hands resting calmly on the desk. "Is that what you think?" she asked quietly, her voice deceptively soft. "That I'm just decoration with a teleprompter?" He shrugged, feigning casualness. "I think a lot of viewers are asking." That's when she moved. Her hand clenched, her spine straightened, and with a sudden, powerful motion, Caroline slammed her fist on the table. Thud! It echoed across the room like a gavel in a courtroom. The crowd jumped. A few people clapped reflexively, caught in the raw energy of the moment. Piers flinched, not out of fear, but because he knew with chilling certainty he'd irrevocably lost control of the interview. "You want to talk about independence?" Caroline's voice rose, not shouting, but fierce, unwavering, cutting through the silence. "I walked into this building without a script. I sat in that chair knowing you'd try to rattle me. And I'm still sitting here, louder, clearer, and freer than you ever expected." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, a laser-like intensity. "I don't carry water for Trump. I carry truth. And if that truth scares people like you, maybe it's because you're not used to hearing it from someone who doesn't apologize for believing it." The audience erupted. Some stood. One person in the second row yelled, "That's right!" Piers tried to cut in. "Look, no one—" But Caroline wasn't finished. "I represent the millions who were told they were too rural, too religious, too white, too conservative to matter. You call it noise. I call it a voice. And that voice, it's not going away. I am that voice." In that moment, Piers Morgan, a man who prided himself on controlling the room, was reduced to silence. The silence following Caroline's words wasn't empty. It was charged. The air inside the studio felt electric, like the seconds before a thunderstorm. Piers Morgan, ever the showman, instinctively knew the moment had spiraled out of his grasp, but he wasn't ready to concede. Not yet. He adjusted his tie and gave a thin, calculated smile. "Quite a performance," he said, his voice laced with irony. "But is this politics, Caroline, or theatre?" Caroline exhaled softly, almost like she'd been expecting the deflection. "It's theatre," she said calmly, "but only because people like you have turned real policy into entertainment." She paused, letting her words simmer. "I came here to talk about what matters: the economy, the southern border, the erosion of faith, both in God and in country. But you want to make it about optics, about personality, about whether I can handle the pressure. Well, here I am, still standing, still answering, and I haven't ducked a single question." The audience began clapping again, a steady, building rhythm. Piers waved a hand, trying to bring the temperature down. "Okay, but let's back up." "No," Caroline said sharply, standing now, her presence filling the screen. "Let's not back up, let's move forward." She turned toward the live camera, her voice steady but emotionally raw, a direct appeal to the viewers. "I want every woman watching this, every conservative who's been mocked, every Christian told to sit down. I want them to see this moment and know they're not alone. You're not crazy for believing in traditional values. You're not wrong for demanding secure borders or lower taxes. And you're not weak for crying out when your voice is dismissed." Piers leaned forward, a note of tension in his throat. "But Caroline, anger isn't a strategy." "This isn't anger," she snapped back, her eyes blazing with conviction. "This is clarity, and clarity sounds loud when people have spent years covering their ears." Someone in the front row stood up and clapped, then another. The crowd was shifting, not just in energy, but in allegiance. Even some who hadn't come. Inna's fans were nodding now. Piers tried one last time, a desperate attempt to diminish her. "But you're not in power. You're a spokesperson, not a policymaker." Caroline smiled, a triumphant, knowing grin. "Not yet." The room exploded with cheers. What happened next was beyond even Caroline's expectations. As the live segment ended and Piers stiffly turned to camera with his scripted closing line, the audience remained standing. Some chanted her name softly, others just stared, stunned by the seismic shift they had just witnessed. But the real storm didn't start in the studio, it started online. Before the lights cooled on set, Caroline's fiery monologue was clipped and posted on X, gaining 300,000 views in under an hour. The moment her fist hit the table captioned, "This is when she took control," spread like gasoline and dry brush. Young women shared it with the quote, "She didn't break, she broke them." Conservative influencers hailed her as the new face of unapologetic republicanism. Liberal accounts scrambled to minimize the moment, calling it performance art. But even they couldn't ignore the numbers. The clip dominated trending topics by midnight. Caroline won, just Piers folded. Cable news panels lit up in real time. Fox News called it a seismic moment in political media. Newsmax aired it 4 times in 1 hour. Even MSNBC couldn't resist showing the confrontation, albeit with the disclaimer, "Viewer discretion advised." Contains heated exchange. Back in the green room, Caroline sat quietly with her team, the calm eye of the storm. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Dozens of missed calls and texts flooded in. Trump's inner circle, state representatives, youth conservative. Groups all asking the same thing. How did you pull that off? Caroline simply said, I didn't blink. A producer from another major network knocked on the door. We'd like to have you next week, prime time, no restrictions. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she opened her phone and read the last notification, a Truth Social post from Donald J. Trump himself. Caroline Levit just crushed it on Piers Morgan. No one could have done it better. She's not just my voice, she's the future. Her staff froze. This wasn't just viral heat. This was the spark of a national shift. Caroline looked up, calm as ever. Tell them I'll be there, but next time I'm not coming as a guest. As the morning after the interview dawned, America was already split, but energized. Cable news anchors scrambled for a narrative. CNN labeled it confrontational. The New York Times ran a column asking if Caroline had gone too far. But in coffee shops, college dorms, and construction sites across the country, people weren't talking about Piers Morgan. They were talking about her. The clip of Caroline slamming her fist on the table hit 12 million views by noon. TikTok edits paired her stare down with music from Gladiator and Interstellar. Gen Z influencers who had never even liked Trump reposted the moment with captions like, "You don't have to agree with her to admit she owned that room." Fox News invited her back for an exclusive. CPAC organizers called. Turning Point USA announced she'd headlined their next rally. The conservative base didn't just embrace her, they rallied behind her like a rising star. At the White House, a source leaked to Politico that Trump personally called her that morning. Caroline, you've got fire. We need more of that. You didn't just defend me, you made me look good. Keep going. And Caroline would, but not to defend anyone this time. She had become more than a spokesperson. She was now a symbol. Later that week, she walked into a press event in D.C. No teleprompter, no notes, just the same sharp navy suit and that simple silver cross around her neck. Cameras flashed, microphones extended. Someone asked if she'd go back on Piers Morgan's show. Caroline smiled coolly, her gaze piercing the lens of the nearest camera. Next time, he'll come on mine. The crowd laughed, then applauded, a roar of approval. She turned and looked directly into a Fox camera filming live, her message echoing across the nation. This isn't about yelling, it's about not backing down. And if you're someone out there who's been told to sit down, keep quiet. Or wait your turn, I'm telling you, your turn just arrived. The room erupted. Caroline Levit didn't just win an argument that night. She forged a path for a new kind of leadership, unapologetic, bold, and impossible to ignore. As the feed faded out and the headlines continued to roll, one truth had become crystal clear. She didn't fold. She flipped the table, and the nation watched. What you just witnessed wasn't just a clash between two strong voices on live television. It was the moment the script flipped. In a world where power often silences principle, Caroline Levit showed what it means to stand your ground, speak your truth, and shake the room doing it. She didn't cave under pressure. She didn't beg for approval. She didn't fold. She fought. This wasn't just another interview. It was a declaration. So if you've ever been underestimated, sidelined, or told you're not strong enough, remember this moment. Remember that sometimes all it takes is one voice, one table slam, and one undeniable truth to shift the entire conversation. If you found this story compelling, if it ignited a spark of defiance in you, then make sure to subscribe to our channel. For more stories of unwavering resolve, like this video to show your support and share it with anyone who needs to hear this message. And don't forget to comment below. Tell us what resonated with you most and hit that notification bell so you don't miss when we're just getting started on the next powerful narrative.